Even if you're hearing the three phases and going, oh, we're not as far as we thought, and that's kind of initially hard, naming like what you have done or where you have come, the growth you have experienced so far, and then reminding yourself that, okay, if I keep doing those things, I will continue to experience growth.
Good day, friends. I'm Jonathan Daugherty, and I'm so glad to have you here with us today on the PSR podcast, because in this episode, we welcome back Matthew and Joanna Raabsmith to dive into their 3 phases of couple recovery model for healing from sexual addiction and betrayal trauma. Together, we explore the recovery, restoration, and renewal phases, discussing how couples can move from crisis and individual healing to rebuilding trust, intimacy, and shared purpose. Joanna and Matthew share practical tips, emphasize the importance of trauma-informed support, and encourage patience with kind of the non-linear journey of recovery. So whether you're just starting in recovery or seeking restoration and renewal for your relationship, their insights offer hope and guidance for every step of the process. To learn more about Matthew and Joanna and their marriage resources, visit rabsmithteam.com. For additional resources, visit bebroken.org or check out all the links that we're going to put in today's show notes. And as always, friends, I'm going to encourage you to rate and review the podcast after listening to help others find it. Now, let's go ahead and dive into today's hopeful and practical conversation with Matthew and Joanna. Well, all right, friends, we have back with us Matthew and Joanna Raabsmith. So welcome back, guys.
So good to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, excited to be here again.
I feel like we really hit the jackpot because we have had you guys on twice in 1 year. And that's I feel like this is a bonus, because sometimes that doesn't get to happen.
Yeah, it's perfect that the schedules align this way. We love the community that you guys have built, and we're excited to kind of be back and keep talking about this work.
Yeah, the reason I wanted to have you guys back on is because one of our staff members actually posted in our internal chat a blog that you guys had written. And it's really, as soon as I read the blog, I was like, well, this is simply an extension of what you guys do every single day in your counseling work. But I thought, this is too good. We've got to have this conversation because I believe there's going to be a lot of couples in our audience that this is going to resonate with because it gives clarity to a pathway. Mm-hmm. And it's simply, you had this blog that was simply entitled The 3 Phases of Couple Recovery and what kind of help you need in each. Yeah. And so we really wanted to just dive into that. I'd love to just go through the 3 phases and then really just kind of dig into each one of them. But before that, can you guys share a little bit about your counseling practice and ministry work that you guys do?
Yeah, it's starting to become something we've done for a while now. The years are adding up, but we have had just the incredible opportunity of really focusing our work with couples who are trying to restore their marriage, their lives after the impact of either sexual addiction, right, and betrayal. And God did an incredible work in our life and in our marriage. I think put a heart in us to get trained and kind of knowledgeable in how to help. And we've really just had a blessing of being able to do that. And so we see couples. We've got a team now of other coaches and clinicians that are helping us on this journey. It's been really, really fun.
That's great. Well, let's dive in because just to kind of give the high level, you named these 3 phases, the recovery phase, the restoration phase, and the renewal phase. Now, before we get any further, can you at least first start with letting us know that recovery for couples or individuals never actually happens in a straight line? So even though you're giving these 3 kind of phases, can you talk first about how it's a little messier than how it can write out cleanly in a blog, and yet still that it's important that we have these markers along the way?
Right. The hope is that the overall trajectory, right, is moving in a direction. But absolutely, you'll feel like you move forward and then you move backwards and then you move forward again. Mm-hmm. And so going, okay, can we give some general structure around the healing process, some general definition of kind of what it looks like to move in a healthy direction, in a healthy way, so couples can know, am I at least on the right path, right? Are we headed in the right direction? But there's going to be some pieces that absolutely overlap, right? And some kind of individual and relational pieces. And so we give some recommendations around when those happen, but it's not clean cut, right? Like you're always in relationship. We always tell couples when they come to us, it's not like when we recommend individual work, it's not like your relationship is ending. You can just focus on the individual work and then we'll bring the relationship back, right? You're still in relationship, you're still relating. And so some of those pieces will be present the entire way, even as they may be in different phases.
Yeah, and you even mentioned in the article that you can kind of ebb and flow sometimes back into some of these others.
Absolutely.
And I think it's so important for couples to know that that does not indicate like a failure of some sort.
Yeah.
Like if you're going into kind of the the restoration phase, but then you realize, oh, there's still some recovery work that has to happen. It's not like, oh my goodness, all is lost. We took 2 steps back. It's still, like you said, about the relationship, and there's still progress happening, right?
100%.
Yeah, it's really about awareness of where we are. And like you said, there's not value ascribed to these. So because a couple is in recovery, that doesn't make them a worse couple than a couple in renewal. That's just where they are.
Yes.
And that's where God has the work to be doing, right? And so it's really about what kind of work do we need to be doing in these phases rather than, okay, once we've made it to this phase, right, we're better. And then this phase, we're better, right? Sometimes couples in renewal recognize we've got some big gaps. We've got some things that we need to work on. Some couples in recovery are incredibly strong couples, right? They're really strong, but they've got some pieces that they need to work on in order to be kind of that lived experience of what God designed.
And it's really important to be faithful to the stage you're in. We actually see a lot of damage be done by couples who wish they maybe were further along and they're trying to do that work, but the relationship isn't ready for it yet, right? So if they should really be focusing on that recovery stage, but they're really pouring into like relational restoration, it's actually going to do more harm and more damage to the relationship rather than healing. And so you don't want to push into phases that you're not ready for yet.
Yeah. So even though it's not linear, you can't skip a phase, right? So that's important to know, right?
Absolutely.
So let's dive into this first one. So you call the first phase recovery phase. So walk us through what that is and what's kind of the key focus in that phase, and then we'll get into what are some specific action steps or things that are necessary in that stage.
Yeah. The recovery phase occurs when we identify our deep wounding. So recovery is really about knowing that there's wounding. When there is discovery or disclosure for a couple, right, there's an acknowledgement, there's kind of a reality of wounding now on both sides. For the spouse who betrayed, right, did the betraying, we know that as we work with those spouses, we find, right, wounding usually from childhood, right, early life experiences, abuse, neglect, trauma, and that wounding has been kind of ignored. And that the kind of ignoring of that wounding has created these later life problems. But as well for the partner who's been betrayed, now they've got the wounding in the relationship. They've had this experience of having their kind of life ripped apart. And so doing recovery is recognizing we're hurt. We are both hurting, and we're hurting in such a way that if we were to go on and just try to kind of live as normal, it'd be like breaking our leg and running in a 5K the next day as if nothing was different, right? We might will ourselves to do it, but the level of injury, the pain that's going to be caused. And so recovery is going, oh, wait, I'm hurt and I need to stop. And I'm really going to have to change a lot about the way I live to be able to get back to where I want to be.
And a lot of that will look like getting some healthy, safe structures in place for the healing of that wound to really be able to happen. And so that's why it's really important that there's not a lot of relational work at that point, because you have two wounded people who they're not going to be able to care for each other or the relationship very well at that point, right? And so finding counselors, coaches, groups, support in that phase for you to be able to focus on your own healing of those wounds, of the kind of hurt that you've been through, is going to be an important step too.
Yeah.
Yeah, you talk about how this sometimes is considered kind of the crisis stage, like, hey, you're dealing with the crisis, the bomb that's blown up. For the betraying partner, it's looking at maybe some past wounds. For the betrayed partner, it's like this is a current wound that has had like a trauma that's happened. But
Right.
you mentioned also how for a lot of couples, this can feel to them like survival mode.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And can you talk a little bit about how sometimes what that feels like for a couple is we wonder if maybe there's any progress going on, even if, let's say, they're engaging some of these recovery, steps.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because it makes sense. One, I think based on remembering, like, we are all attachment creatures, right? We all thrive in attachment, and the most secure attachments and the most important attachments are the ones we're going to go to. And the marriage attachment is a huge attachment for people. So what ends up happening, right, is they think, okay, I want us to act like, right, we're that couple, and even though I know there's this distance between us, they'll still do things, right. They'll try to have conversations about something, and they'll come into our office, and like we started talking maybe about his past, but then that unraveled, right, and that's that sign, and that feels like they're not making progress because they're recognizing as they're trying to kind of work together as a couple.
Yeah.
That's really, really difficult. What they're failing to see, though, is that they're usually, if they're doing good recovery, what we see is they're gaining incredible personal insights. They're starting to see things that they maybe have not seen before. They're getting honest about, hey, this thing has been holding me back and I want to do something about it. But that means I'm going to have to make some tough decisions about how I live, how I show up, about maybe my relationship with God and the way that's operating.
Yeah. And for betrayed partners, it's really hard, right? Because it's tempting to compare my life and my ability to function now that I've experienced this trauma to before. And it's going to be way lower for most partners. When you experience trauma, it's like a bomb exploded in your life, and it takes a while to pick up the pieces. And that can feel really frustrating, right? If your capacity is just so much lower than you're used to. And it's frustrating when it takes so long, it feels like, for that to come back.
Mm-hmm. Now you talk about in this phase, what's most important for a couple is safety, both like you call it structurally and emotionally. Can you talk about what some of the key elements are that help to create some of that emotional and structural safety for a couple?
Yeah, I mean, we use the word boundaries, but we love the word structure, I think, better, because really what it's about is saying, do we have a way in which we're going to interact and kind of process and go through things that is going to really serve our relationship while maybe not working on the relational dynamics? And that's kind of the paradox, right? We're caring for the relationship while not necessarily talking about the relationship, how we work together. And so that structure might look like, we're going to have a check-in every day, but that check-in has a particular focus, right? We know we prepare for that check-in, right? It's not an off-the-cuff kind of conversation, but instead it's something that has some very clear focuses, some very clear kind of sharing of information in terms of what's going to be most helpful. And we keep it there, and that's okay, right? We talk to a lot of couples. We noticed couples would come to us and be like, do you check in every day? And they're like, yeah, at the end of the day, we kind of chat. And I maybe sometimes I'll tell her if I had a relapse or if I struggled, right? But there's no structure, there's no consistency to it. And to an injured brain, that is really, really difficult. That's tons of extra chaos. And so that structure is what allows the brain to heal so that we can interact on a kind of more free level.
If you imagine that wound as like that broken leg, we'll usually say like, okay, that initial structure, it's going to be fairly strict, like a cast. You want to cast around that leg. And it's not restrictive in terms of like we're trying to prevent freedom. It's providing like these are the safe bounds that you can currently function in based on where you're at. The hope is as you honor that, you heal and you get to move to a boot. You take the cast off and you get to wear a somewhat flexible boot, but there's still some structure there. And eventually you may be strong enough that you can go to a normal shoe, right? And so thinking about that structure, that boundary as you move along that healing journey can be helpful too. Sometimes they think, well, this is going to be our relationship for all eternity with all these strict rules and this structure. And so helping understand the purpose of that and the long-term goal can be helpful too.
Yeah. And even with that leg example, each one of those quote unquote restrictions that's put around the leg actually creates safety for that injury. Because it's like, hey, I don't want to be banging my leg into stuff while, I've got this very tender bone that's been set and trying to heal.
Exactly.
You mentioned also that it's really important in this phase that support must be trauma aware. Can you describe why that is so important in terms of the caregivers, the counselors, that they be trauma informed?
Yeah. And I think this is so important for both sides because what can often happen is when betrayal comes up, the often thought is maybe it's a relational issue, right? Something happened in the relationship and it caused there to be this kind of betrayal and infidelity. And what those of us who've been in the field long enough know is these aren't relational issues. These are personal issues that are brought into relationships, right? And so we've got to treat them individually and the trauma that's causing them, right? Just like the betrayal trauma response, the addict response. And so recognizing, okay, we have to work on that trauma, that underlying issue, because if I just kind of think of the addiction as behavioral, like, oh, it's just a moral issue, this is just something that I wish I was better at, but I'm not dealing with the underlying issue, what's going to happen is I can white knuckle the behavior. I can kind of stop the behavior, but what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to heal the wound. And then when we go into the next phase and we're talking more about the emotional reality of what's happened between us, that's going to cave in on itself. And so, from the addict side, the betraying side, I want to make sure I'm working with someone who understands trauma, who understands helping me get to the root issue.
Yeah, and you can imagine, right? If a doctor didn't understand bones or that they break and they come in and try to treat someone, right? They may be asking that patient to do things that are really dangerous or actually not helpful in the healing process. And we definitely see that with betrayed partners or couples where there's been betrayal. If that couples therapist is not betrayal trauma informed, they may push that couple to be more vulnerable, more intimate than is safe. And it can really start to trigger the trauma or even create new traumas and send the couple backwards in terms of healing.
Yeah. Some of the worst advice I've heard is like, when whoever the caregiver is will say something to like a wife and say, well, maybe if you just gave your husband more sex, then this wouldn't be a problem. Like, that's terrible damage. That's horrible, advice for a couple that's dealing with this.
Yes.
You also talk about, and thinking of these as phases. Again, I like to think of them not necessarily in a straight line, but really you're building a new structure.
Yep.
And so this first phase is the foundation.
Yep.
Can you, before we go to the next phase, can you talk a little bit on the idea of there's no rush to this? And it's really important that you get this foundational level right in order to build onto the next phases.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's hard because this phase is less relational, right?
Yeah.
It's more individualized. It is kind of going back to go forward, right? So we'll sometimes say you got to slow down to speed up. But that's hard, right? It's hard for the human brain. I think there's a reason God calls us to patience because he knows we're impatient. And so we get it that our soul's desire, right, desires that connection. But like we said, we've just seen the rushing is actually what sends couples in a kind of forever. We've seen couples feel like they're in forever recovery because they're always wanting to kind of move ahead. Rather than kind of slowing down. What's wonderful is when you see someone truly attend to their trauma and find healing, it's just a totally different ballgame in the next phases. It's not easy, right? There's still work and challenge to it, but there's just so much more kind of, I think, some power and joy to the process when people take the time to really attend. And we know there's never going to be that perfect transition moment, right? You don't get a
Right. Yeah.
degree, right? Here's your trauma degree, right? You can move forward. But there usually is a sense, and we typically will see this from partners, right?
Yeah.
It's the betrayed spouse who will start to tell us, I think there's been some healing here. I can see some differences in the way that I'm showing up and even in the way that they're showing up that tells me maybe we're ready to kind of start to build back who we want to be.
And one trick is to listen to your body, not your brain, when it comes to moving through these phases. I think the temptation is for our brain to want us to move more quickly through healing because it's not fun. It's not comfortable. There's a lot of pain and discomfort in this process. And so it wants us to get out of it. But our bodies will be a telltale sign if we're ready to move on or not. Right? Like, especially the partner's body.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I think, being a man and having been the one who did the betraying in my own story, I can absolutely resonate with that idea that my brain wanted to go way faster than everything else in the process. Because it was like, I could logically see, and I could maybe do behavioral things, and I could do stuff that feels like progress when in fact it's like I'm not really dealing with the underlying emotional and abuse issues. So let's go to phase 2, which you call the restoration phase. And in this phase, you talk about this is where a lot of the deeper layers of grief and pain and emotional injury start to surface. And that a lot of times you said that this can be the most emotionally intense stage, but it's the stage where you talk about your healing wounds and you're starting to rebuild that connection. So help us understand what's going on in this phase and also what helps a couple when they get into this phase.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing for this phase, coming into it and getting through it, is the ability to regulate your emotions, right? The way we understand trauma is it really jacks with your emotional regulatory system. And so I deal with trauma, I deal with those underlying issues, those wounds. I rebuild a sense of kind of self and personal safety so that we can enter into difficult conversations, right? And so from a kind of addict or betraying side, the idea is that I lied because I couldn't emotionally handle telling the truth. I couldn't handle the emotions of the other people in my life knowing what I did, right? My own shame, my own insecurities kept me hiding. The idea of recovery is I heal that, right? I begin to really heal that process so I can be transparent, but also not just transparent, able to reckon with people's disappointment, sadness, right? Their grief, so that I can engage my own grief. And that's part of it. I think one of the things that addicts sometimes forget is being able to engage other people's grief is actually what helps you engage your own. It helps you to find your own sense of loss and sadness and recognition of this isn't the life I wanted for myself. I didn't want to lose this time. And so that's really this phase, is being ready for that and kind of engaging it.
And for the partner who's been betrayed, it's hopefully I've seen enough change in my spouse that says I am now safe to start to be vulnerable again. I can indeed share some of that pain, some of that experience, and I trust to some degree that it will be held with understanding, compassion, sensitivity, empathy, and that they'll be able to respond and hold. Not perfectly, right? No one's going to be able to do that perfectly all the time. It's hard. It's really hard. But I've seen some evidence that I can trust that more often than not, that will be the case. And so we're going to enter into more and more of those types of conversations that eventually lead to a really important process we call couple grieving, which is a little bit different than kind of the partner being able to share their pain around the betrayal, the experience, and have that empathetic response. That's really important, but it's much more of a unified, it's now us against the addiction or against the betrayal, right? Rather than, hey, can you hear my experience of your betrayal, right? It's a much more unified experience where both people get to sit and grieve the loss that has been experienced because of what's happened.
Now, you put something in this phase that I'm so glad that you put it in this phase, but so many people think, shouldn't that come earlier, especially if you're a Christian? And you talk about forgiveness, forgiveness conversations in this stage or in this phase. And why did you put it in the second phase rather than earlier in the process for couples recovery?
I think the big reason is because forgiveness requires a real recognition of the damage that you've done. And that's really hard if you've not done recovery. Kind of like I mentioned, we're most of us, when we hide, we're hiding from the impact of our actions. We don't want to face the death that our choices cause. And which makes sense, right? Because we're all afraid that if I do that, I'm going to lose everyone. I'm going to lose everything. And so part of that rebuilding of my internal sense is what then allows me to be the kind of person to make amends. And amends are never demand oriented, right? When I make amends, it's not about I'm doing this so I get something, right? I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. It's who I am. It's who God has made me to be. And so that work, if it comes too early, starts to come with a lot of demands. I'll hear guys struggle with, why hasn't she forgiven me yet? Why doesn't she want to move on, right? There's this kind of expectation. When forgiveness processes are delayed, I've seen betrayers be much more comfortable with saying, I'm not on a timetable. This is not an expectation I have. I just want to make right? I want to do what I can do to address the impact. As well as, I think, relationally, it's in a place to be able to hold the challenges of how do we actually deal with debt in the relationship, right? How do we deal with the fact that one of us showed up in a way that the other one didn't, or failed to show up? And we have to reckon with that, right? Forgiveness is not throwing that out the window. It's actually dealing with it. It's actually going, how did this impact our marriage, right? How did this change who we were?
And even as we kind of start that process in that second phase, it really doesn't finish. Well, it probably never finishes, but in terms of what we usually think of, until that third phase, really in that renewal phase, I would say is kind of when forgiveness really
kind of culminates.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I was going to say too, I think sometimes there's this, we forget that forgiveness is an aspect of our relationship, in a healthy relationship. It's not the target.
Yes.
Like, there's so many other things that go into a healthy relationship, and one of them is forgiveness.
Yes.
But sometimes that can be so highlighted sometimes through this Christian lens that it's like that almost becomes the target that a couple is aiming for, where it's like, oh, I hate to put it this way, it's like you're aiming too low. Like there's way more to the goal of this restoration than just forgiveness. And I like what you said, Matthew, that when the betrayer starts to understand that, there will be a humility that is growing in their heart where they go, that's not what I'm after, because I'm actually after your heart. I'm not after you just simply forgiving me, because to try to just make forgiveness the goal, I'm still focused on me. I want you to forgive me instead of going, I have hurt you, and I'm going to do whatever I can to try to repair that wound. So those are two very different dynamics, right?
Yes.
Now you put in here that sometimes this phase is often the longest. Can you describe what that means and why that is? Why can't you kind of go through this and then say, boom, we've hit restoration and now we're on to renewal? Why is this sometimes the longest of the phases?
It's right, like reconciliation, it's a hard process. It is not easy. It's learning a new way of living in relationship and for both people. And that can be hard. That can be scary. There can be forward movement and backward movement. It's probably, even as couples move into renewal, they may dip back into the restoration phase quite a bit for many years. And so I know even in our own relationship, years into recovery, right, had a fantastic relationship. We were helping other couples. We would still have moments in our own life where we had to slow down and pause and go, whoa, that's another impact of the betrayal. We hadn't recognized that. We hadn't realized that. We need to slow down. We need to grieve that together and decide what we're going to do with that. And so those moments will keep happening for a while. And so going like, okay, like we said earlier, that doesn't mean all of a sudden you're backtracking. It just means the process of restoring the level of brokenness that happened it's going to be really long. It's going to be ongoing for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And we are dealing with the human brain, and the human brain plays the numbers, and the numbers, right? It will look at us to say, okay, in this relationship, how safe have I been? How secure, how reliable has my partner been? And it's going to take some time, right? You're going to have to add up some numbers to actually be able to demonstrate to the brain, this is different. And so it is one of those, like, it's not just time, it's time and consistency, right? It's time and reliability, but it is going to take a significant amount because of the significance of the impact. Intimate partner betrayal is one of the single most personally impactful experiences someone can have, right? It really wrecks the system and their understanding of the world. And kind of like a major injury, right? This is not a sprain, right? This is a compound fracture, right? This is the kind of thing that, yes, it can heal, and it can heal in a way that you might never even know, right? It kind of feels like it's totally gone, but that will take time. It's not going to be some Advil and ice and run on it next week.
Right. Now, what I love is that you've added this third phase, because I think there's a lot of couples that think it's just the first two. I just need recovery and I just need restoration. And they don't realize that there's this renewal phase. And in this renewal phase, you say there's this key question that a couple needs to ask, which is, what kind of relationship do we want from here? So can you talk about what the renewal phase is and kind of what are the key elements that will help a couple really gain some momentum in this renewal phase?
Yes, this is definitely the most fun, most exciting phase, especially if you didn't think it was there, right?
Yeah.
I think for a long time, I didn't think it was there, right? There was not a lot of information about betrayal trauma, relational recovery when we went through all of this. And so we were kind of limping along a little bit on our own. And for a while, I thought like, oh, I guess we just kind of like piece it together best we can. We kind of restore and then we move on. But something felt like it was missing. And so this idea of like, oh, wait, we get to now build something new that I can get excited about again, right? Because I think I felt this like kind of like regret or sadness that this is all we'll ever be. And so this idea of like, no, because of what we've been through, because of the deep work we have done individually and as a couple, we now have an opportunity to choose what we want our relationship to look like, and what, especially that purpose was big for us. What is the purpose in our relationship? And as we get to live into that purpose, we experience new life in our life, in our relationship, and in the relationships we're interacting with on a daily basis.
That's good. And I wanted you actually, in the article, you listed 3 things in here that really help with that. And I'm going to read them off. And I'm glad that you put the third one as the third one. You said designing rituals of connection. You said exploring shared dreams and identity. And then you said deepening sexual and emotional intimacy. How many couples try to get that third one way earlier in the process? Like, hey, this is all about us trying to learn how to reconnect sexually and all this. So talk about some of those, the first 2 really, about the rituals of connection and also just starting to dream, like kind of creating a new couple's identity together.
Yeah. In some ways, you are kind of having to course correct the earlier work, right? We've separated a little bit. We've focused a lot more individually. We've really been kind of our individual paths. And some couples can kind of get stuck in this. I'll talk to guys who sometimes he's like, I'm better connected to the guys in my recovery group than I am my wife. I see them more. I talk to them more. And so part of this work is going, hey, now that there is healing, how do we structure our life not to drift apart? The world, would like nothing more than us to never see each other, never experience togetherness. We don't have to be together all the time, but how do we create these moments of connection? I think is so key. What are we doing to kind of to build that?
Yeah, and helping couples develop those rituals. There are some that a lot of couples will do, like check-ins, things like that. But it's really fun helping couples develop like what works for you and the kind of relationship you're creating, right? Are you a couple that really feels connected when you're active together, or when you're working on projects together, when you're parenting together? Like, what do you want? Deep conversations on a really regular basis? Like, what does your relationship and your relational connection thrive on? And really helping them create kind of almost like a plan for their relationship and how to cultivate that on an ongoing basis.
And the the dreaming is the gift. It's the gift of all the work, right? The fact that we get to dream and we get to vision and imagine, that just it kind of remotivates us for that work. What we find is couples who get to renewal, they have this kind of recharge, right? They're like, okay, like we've made it through the woods a little bit, right? Now what's next, you know? And that might be going back a little bit and doing some work that we know is there, or it might just be saying, how do we want to live on a day-to-day basis? What do we want our life to like? And helping remind couples that still has to be intentional. And I think that's the what we've tried to talk about with the renewal phase is, if you lose your intention as you go along, you'll lose your progress. You're going to lose your momentum. So maintaining that intentionality, and like I said, including where we go with our physical intimacy, our sexual intimacy, what that healing process looks like. Because what we know is that we want to move ahead of the body. And so because the body is so integrated into our sexual experience, it's usually one of the last places of kind of full healing and restoration to take place. And so we have it there, not because we don't think there will be any sexual or physical connection before that, but because diving into that part of our relationship and the kind of renewal and strengthening of that needs to happen from a really strong emotional connection.
And we get questions all the time from couples like, is it too early, or is it okay to start re-engaging sexually, right? And so obviously every couple is so different and so unique in that. But what I'll usually help them think about is, you don't want to practice old ways of functioning, right? And so if you aren't at the place to really reimagine and develop a new healthy way of functioning sexually, you probably need to wait until you're ready to do that. Because if you practice the old healthy, unhealthy, destructive ways, right? Like don't practice that anymore. And so, okay, well, where do we need to be individually, emotionally in our journey, and then as a couple emotionally in our journey, to be able to do that well together?
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up here, I love the fact that in all these phases, there's nothing that is static, meaning there's always movement. And so to kind of give a quick recap, you say that in the recovery phase, you need clarity and safety. In the restoration phase, you need skilled emotional guidance and repair. And then in the renewal phase, you need vision, support, and a sense of shared purpose. So as we close, I just want you to maybe give a word of hope to the couples that are listening that are starting to see themselves somewhere in here, and just give them a sense of hope, especially for the benefit, the value of continuing on this journey.
I think about the couple in recovery and just reminding them the habits you build early will pay off in incredible ways. And it's change is always something you don't see right away. But then when you stop and you look back, right? Like we were away from our kids for like 5 days, and we came back, and I swear they had grown, right? It was like, what, you know, like how did you go 2 inches? Like what? And I think that sometimes in our relationships we forget that. And so but it is that early work, that kind of dedication to the daily commitments, right? The daily grind, that I guarantee you, when you get into the restoration and the renewal phase, you will look back on that and be so thankful, right? That rhythm is what allows me to operate at this kind of high level. And that's really what we see for all successful people across all boards. They have rhythms, right? They have practices that are very minute and small that they've developed, but that's what allows them to experience kind of high levels of success.
Yeah. And it's so easy to get focused on where we aren't, what we don't have, right? Which there's a piece that's important, right, to help us keep moving and keep growing. But we can become really depressed if that's all we ever see, and we miss how we have grown. And so even if you're hearing the 3 phases and going, oh, we're not as far as we thought, and that's kind of initially hard, naming like what you have done or where you have come, the growth you have experienced so far, and then reminding yourself that, okay, if I keep doing those things, I will continue to experience growth. And I think, and also that you're not alone in this journey. You don't have to figure it out on your own. I think it can be scary and daunting sometimes, thinking about that. So don't hesitate to reach out to people for support. If you're going, well, we're here, but we're stuck and we don't know how to move forward, right? Like, there are ways to help you.
Yeah. With that, I'd love for you to share with our listeners and viewers kind of where they can get maybe some of the help from you guys, some resources that you have. So where can they go to get more information about y'all and your resources?
Absolutely. Yeah. We kind of have different resources for each different phase as I'm thinking about it. So for those couples who find themselves more in that recovery phase, we offer individual and couples coaching, kind of more of a one-on-one approach to really help you through that crisis phase. For couples kind of in that recovery phase and moving on, we have a couples group program called Renewing Us that's much more about kind of restoring and now rebuilding relationship. And then we're really excited for the first time ever for that renewal phase, we're offering an in-person couples retreat in November of this year, where couples who have been through this journey, who understand the experience, to come together in community and really be encouraged and refreshed and really dive into that new couple identity.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, we will be sure to put all that in the show notes so that people can get connected to that. Matthew and Joanna, thank you again for being with us. It's just been really invaluable information for us as couples. So thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And listeners and viewers, like I said, we're going to put all this information in the show notes. I'll put a link to the blog post as well, so you can see what we basically just covered in this. But if you're at anywhere in this process, reach out to us, because we want to help you take your next best step to wholeness in Christ and better connections in your relationship. So we look forward to seeing you back here again next time on the Pure Sex Radio program. Take care.